Hello there, gamerinos and gamerinas. Welcome to UnicornStorm. This is Rady, and today I have with me another XBox GamePass recommendation. Now, the purpose of this series is to showcase games included in the Xbox GamePass subscription for PC that justify the fee for a single month. So this format differs from my Is It Worth Your While series in that it is already a given that the games being showcased are worth playing, while in the other series I highlight games I've been interested in and argue why I think they are worth playing or not. So yeah, we can start right off with me telling you that Sea of Stars is a really fun JRPG inspired by many of the Golden Age 16-bit Square and Enix games, most prominently Chrono Trigger. But there's much more to it. It is an amalgamation of all kinds of different styles. There's the aforementioned Chrono Trigger, with enemies visible on the exploration screen and battles taking place on the same screen. Even more, enemies often go about all kinds of activities and you can try to avoid them or even try to ambush them for a preemptive strike. During combat, multi-target attacks are based on the enemy's positions. There are multi-character combo attacks, and each character is defined by a prominent element or attribute. We have the party following along in a line, miniature versions of the characters on the overworld, and save files named after the chapter names. The level design, with its twisting and turning pathways, interconnecting and looping in on each other, reminds me a lot of Trials of Mana, but this game, not shackled by technical limitations of the past, takes it even further. So the game still features the iconic and well-known pseudo 3D overhead perspective, but doesn't just use it to show you the scope of the world and has you freely move around in any direction. It makes an effort to incorporate the perspective into the level design, not only using the X and Y axis, but also very much utilizing the implied Z axis, with many paths and bridges crossing over and under one another, much more so than I have seen from other games. And many of the puzzles and obstacles require you to be mindful of the simulated three-dimensional movement. For example, when you have to jump down from high places to break through weakened floor. And speaking of puzzles, the puzzle-based dungeons are very similar to Terranigma's challenges, with more than just the odd hidden switch in a room to open a passage, but full-blown dungeons designed around a specific mechanic. And there's even some Mario RPG in there with the timing-based critical attacks, though that one has become a widespread mechanic in turn-based RPGs. The combat spouts a surprisingly big amount of depth for how simplistic it presents itself. It is turn-based combat, but with a whole lot of unique identity. For your own party, there is no fixed turn order. You can choose whoever you want to act at any given moment, but when they have acted, they are on a kind of cooldown until everyone else has taken their turn. Now, enemies also don't have a turn order. Every individual enemy has its own cooldown that decreases with every action you take. When it reaches 0, the enemy attacks, regardless of how many ready party members you have left. Sometimes enemies charge up magic spells or special attacks that are a lot more powerful than their regular attacks, or have special effects that can turn the tides of combat rather quickly. You're not entirely at their mercy though. Whenever an enemy charges up an attack, a bunch of symbols is displayed next to their cooldown counter, and you can break their concentration and prevent them from carrying out their attack by inflicting the correct types of damage before the counter hits 0. And depending on the strength of the attack, there can be more or less symbols with more or less variations. Some combinations are nearly or outright impossible, depending on your party setup or point in the game, because your party members all have their dedicated elements and attack types. Weapons come with slashing or crushing damage, and magic with sun or moon alignment. So you sometimes have to pick and choose which attack to prevent. Sometimes there's just not enough time. Sometimes you can't perform the correct attacks. Sometimes multiple enemies charge up heavy hitting attacks. And at times it's more beneficial to deal damage to certain enemies to quickly defeat them and tank the damage from special attacks. But a nice little addition is that you don't have to fully cancel the attack to defend against it. With every symbol you clear from the attack, you weaken it, so even though it still hits you, you can weaken its effect, have it deal less damage or summoning fewer enemies and the like. Mastering the action commands really helps in that regard. Most of your attacks can be enhanced by either pressing the action button again right when your character is about to hit the enemy, or by following a little prompt like holding the button to charge up your attack or using the action button to deflect a projectile. Sometimes the attack gets stronger, but sometimes you do a follow-up attack that counts as a second hit, which can also clear one of the charge up symbols. And of course you can also boost in your defense by pressing the action button the moment you receive damage. Some enemies attack multiple times per turn, so you have to defend against each one of those attacks. And some attacks are rather elaborate and make it a bit hard to guess when to defend. But that's pretty much the extent of it. It never gets as complicated as in the Mario and Luigi games, but it works quite well for what it is and it doesn't make the fights too gimmicky. Well, even more gimmicky than they already are. And for some added strategy as well as adding to the back and forth rhythm of combat, you only have a tiny mana pool for spellcasting and special attacks, which slowly regenerates whenever you perform a standard attack. So weighing up when to use your more powerful attacks and when to wait is the key to success during battles. Attacks and successful action commands also increase your combo gauge and reward you with up to 3 combo points that enable you to perform, well, combo attacks with other party members. It's not as versatile as it has been in Chrono Trigger and much more basic. And it also doesn't require both characters to be ready and only the active character uses their turn. So it's more of a special attack that you have to build up over the course of battle and that requires you to have the correct characters in your active party and is just a little nod towards Chrono Trigger among all the other nods, without the depth of its inspiration. Well, and then there are these little mana fragments that enemies drop whenever you perform a standard attack. You can freely absorb them before a combat action to imbue your attack with the character's prominent attribute. So all of Valera's attacks gain the Lunar Elemental effect, and for Zale it's the Solar Elemental effect, and Gal boosts his attack power. This last mechanic feels a bit tacked on, but it still manages to play into the combat's tactics. When a strong enemy charges up a powerful spell and you're just a few elemental attacks short, boosting your attacks with magical fragments makes the difference between getting a breather or taking a devastating attack to the face. The combat in motion never gets too complicated, but it gives you a lot of options to use at any moment and you have to learn when to rely on what mechanic. Instead of juggling 20 stats and 50 damage types, you only get a handful and a gameplay loop that always has you thinking on your feet. There's no simple dominant strategy because the randomized spell lock symbols always throw a spanner in the works. And you can either prepare for the worst case every time, and by that at times don't capitalize on openings in the enemy's strategy, or you go all out every turn and have to face the consequences when half the enemies decide to charge up their special. During the demo version, the combat system appeared bloated, and maybe it is, but you get eased into it at a nice pace, and once you're familiar with all its quirks, it's a really fun and nifty system. But it's not just a battle system that's a bit packed. The game is full with tons of additional mechanics: foraging, fishing, cooking, relic hunting, time manipulation, puzzle items, in addition with some backtracking for extra treasure, board games. It seems in every area something new gets introduced. It's a bit much, and with that many different mechanics, there's always a risk of them being half-baked or not all that well integrated into the game. But so far they seem alright. They work, they are not too tedious to use. The different, let's call them diversions, don't appear too often, but also not too rarely for them to be redundant. And instead of being mandatory, they are more of a bonus activity to get extra goodies. And it doesn't really seem that they took anything away from the core gameplay. It really appears they were added after the team already had a strong foundation for the game and committed to their core mechanics. This is a very polished game with many unique systems and mechanics, and I don't think any of the game's elements got neglected because someone on the team had to work on these minigames and gimmicks, and they supplement the core gameplay really well. You can fish to get ingredients for cooking, and cooked dishes are the main form of healing in the game, outside of magic spells of course. And sometimes the fishing minigame is used for you to find treasure or quest items. And while you're out exploring and already on the lookout for treasure chests, you stumble all the time upon edible plants and mushrooms, which you can also use during cooking. The relics are just another reward from treasure chests that you're already looking for, and they flesh out one of the many colorful characters you meet in the game. And the game really shines when it comes to characters. They are all quirky, sometimes goofy, always unique. Some are loud and bashful, but even the quieter ones, the more reserved characters, are really memorable. In part due to the way they are written, but also due to their visual designs. Background characters aside, they all have unique looks and animations as well as body types. No slightly altered template characters. Every single one seems to be made from scratch, with amazing amounts of detail and lots of different animations, both idle and purposeful. There are some dots here and there, some scenes where the animation is really cheap, but most of the time it is really good. There are even some cartoon-style cutscenes, and while they look quite good when it comes to the art style, the animation has a bit too few frames, making it look a bit awkward. So much so that I think it would have looked better with just the regular graphics. Somehow I think this is just another thing this game copied or homaged from Chrono Trigger, but there the animation was amazing. Here I don't see the point. A panning still image, maybe in a watercolor style, would have looked so much better, but the moving parts in these animations required a cleaner art style that doesn't hold up as much. It still looks nice, but I just don't see the point. The rest of the visuals are amazing. Incredibly detailed and colorful sprite work. Every environment looks stunning, with very well designed levels that look organic and natural but are still laid out in a very accessible way. Towns and dungeons are easy to navigate, with backtracking reduced to an agreeable amount with the help of convenient shortcuts. Flowers and trees grow in the wild, with the crystal clear water of rivers and lakes sparkling in the sun. Crates and baskets clutter the busy city streets, laundries hanging out to dry. Flower pots adorn the windows of the many houses, and lots of decorative objects beautify the different environments. The game's just a pleasure to look at, and it shines the most with its giant creatures. They are just so well drawn and spout some really fine animation. Coming across one of those really is a highlight and kind of a reward for getting past another challenge. But it's not only the visuals that stand out. The music as well is really good, with strong melodies and even different variations depending on the time of day. The tracks feature a broad range of different instruments, with guitars and pan flutes and drums and a low, deep bass. It reminds me a lot of David Wise's and Evelyn Fisher's style from the Donkey Kong Country games, as well as Yasunori Mitsuda from, again, Chrono Trigger. And while the music doesn't always fit the tone of a scene, perfectly. It still sounds really good, so I'm fine with it. I guess there could have been more character-specific themes or motifs instead of a smaller number of more general leitmotifs that play every time a scene calls for a certain mood, but again, the individual tracks are some fine work, so it isn't the biggest issue. But there is one important aspect where the game falls a bit flat, and it's the plot. Not really the contents of the plot. This one is pretty standard in a way, but not bad. But what doesn't hold up as well is the presentation. You see, the writing is a bit on the nose at times, a bit clumsy. Things get over-explained or a character spouts some obvious exposition. There's a lot of forced humor, and conversations, especially when they're supposed to be funny, can drag on quite a bit. That said, the game makes use of some good, positive, uplifting themes and delivers those through strong and highly expressive and memorable characters. And this, in addition to its lighthearted and upbeat nature, keeps it from getting a chore. I know I tend to be rather harsh when criticizing flaws in a video game. I guess I need to remind myself every once in a while that not every game has the polish of some of gaming's all-time classics or masterpieces. Chrono Trigger had a large team of well-experienced designers to make it as good as it turned out to be. And while I do think that it is worthwhile to mention the things that could have been done better, that doesn't mean the game as a whole is bad. Oh, I spotted little flaws, small animation errors, some pacing issues, some moments where an additional line of dialogue or a character animation would have really improved an awkward scene. But this doesn't take away from how impressive this game really is. Stellar artwork, natural looking yet well thought through level design, creative enemy designs both in terms of visuals as well as gameplay, tons of attention to detail. More expensive games with the backing of a huge publisher aren't half as beautiful, half as detailed or half as mechanically sound. Looking at you, I am Setzner. So yeah, the game is so worth your while and a good reason to try out the Game Pass at least for a month. You'll get your money's worth and might even find a few other games that interest you. So go for it and have a blast with Sea of Stars. But before I send you off, I wish you the greatest of days. This has been Rady and I hope to see you again on the next game.